All right, Jeff from Forte Swordplay again. Follow-up video. So the last video that we did focused on fundamentals of how to grip the sword, as well as how to throw basic cuts with the sword, right? So when it comes to fencing and fighting and all of that good stuff, obviously you can throw all sorts of things with your weapons, but if you're not in the right position, a lot of it's just going to be wasted, right? So being able to be in the right place and coordinating that with your attacks, super important. So the question is, how can you move in the system? What are fundamentals of movement? And so I'm going to present some fundamentals here on stepping and how to coordinate the stepping with the attacks and the cutting. Thoughts on like how those things can fit together. And then towards the end, I'm also going to talk a little bit about how some of these fundamentals actually are not necessarily completely in alignment with a lot of what people do today, and how those things don't have to necessarily collide, but actually can enhance one another. So in terms of stepping, let's start with the blade actions, right? So we were doing half cuts from before, alternating from side to side, right? So these wrath cuts, these Zornhaus, from right to left, from left to right, okay, so from side to side, left, right, left, right. So now some principles in terms of the stepping. We want, in general, to have our shoulders and hips aligned when we're cutting. So when I cut, I want to also step with the foot that's on the same side as the cut, okay? So here, right? And you'll also notice that the timing of this is I'm going to finish my cut when I finish my step. I'm going to finish my step when I finish my cut, okay? So it's almost like a march, right? If I'm doing it from side to side, just march. And I can do that in place, but I can do that in, forward, and I can do it backwards. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, okay? So now I think it's important to actually do this, be able to do this in place, right? So it should not be the case that every time I cut, I have to like move towards the opponent. Sometimes like I might want to move where I'm cutting backwards, right? So being able to do this in place allows me to keep distance with a fixed target. And then if the target moves, I can move with the target, okay? So we just did mechanics on how to alternate cuts from side to side. Is it possible that for the same target, like I might want to actually attack multiple times to the same side? And we definitely do that sometimes. So basically, if I'm cutting to the right and I want to attack again to the right, what I'll do is do a double step, right? Okay, and so one of the great things, sarcastically, about the German tradition is like there's not a whole lot of definition of footwork. However, in Joachim Meyer, 1570, he's one of the rare sources that actually goes out of his way to actually define footwork. And he defines this sideways step, this triangle step, which basically is what we were showing there, right? So from here, I'm going to go sideways, sideways. And every time I go sideways, I'm making a triangle step. It's a little bit like a compass step in the Italian tradition, right? I'm going to go here, and then after I do the first triangle, second triangle. Okay, so Meyer will call that a double triangle or a double step. Okay, so on the right, it looks like here, and on the left. And then if I want to just alternate, I can do that. And at any point, so by doing that, given a target, I can throw pretty much any number of attacks on either side in any sort of sequence that we want to do, okay? So we've been able to attack either side. We've been able to attack multiple sides, multiple times on the same side. And so now, we're kind of moving in this sort of like circle around the opponent, and that's the sideways component of it. And then I can add forward movement or backward component to that. So basically, this is a pretty full method of actually moving around the opponent, right? So taking a step back, we talked about footwork, but how do we put this together with all the blade work? Notice that if I do this again, notice the sort of continuity of movement, right? So as I'm doing this, I'm able to do this with full, steady, consistent movement. Right, so this is a method that allows people to actually sort of stay in motion, right? So that's a very important element, referenced in one of the presumably earlier traditions, earlier sources in the tradition, MS 3227. People used to call it Dobringer, a whole section that kind of refers to a term, Frequens Motus, which we're going to call back to when we actually do one of the drills a little bit later in this series. But this idea of continual or continuous movement. Okay, so why is that important? It's going to allow us to actually do much more fluid and therefore sometimes much more quick and nimble techniques, and actually really up our game when it comes to some of the interpretations that we can actually improve, I think, right? So as a really quick example of like what the impact of this is and how this sort of like compares to how other people sort of typically, from what I've seen, how they move when they're doing cuts, right? So if a lot of the time, if you ask someone to do wrath cuts, just alternating wrath cuts, this is what you'll see. Right, and you'll know, so the thing that I'm gonna point out, and you can kind of listen to this is what happens with their footwork. It's really subtle, but there's an extra placement on the back foot when a lot of people do this kind of stuff, right? And so there's this sort of like assumption that people want to root or stop after each cut, which is fine, you can do that. That's not the only thing you have to do though, right? So to make a case for how this continual movement actually can really help you, just try to do this faster, right? So if I do this faster, if I have to stop every time and plant that back foot, I'm literally taking two steps per cut. And in fact, you don't need to. If I do this faster, wouldn't it be great if I could just do this? Right? So just think about the impact here. If you kind of apply these principles of one step, one cut, it allows you to actually move in a way that is very continuous and actually reduces the number of steps that you potentially are taking with every cut. And it has actually a lot of impact on other things like interpretations, which we will get to in other videos, but really wanted to just kind of introduce that idea of like continuous movement, both, not just with the feet, but also with the sword, and just put that out in terms of sort of like this continuous movement approach as opposed to this discrete footwork movement where you're actually stopping with each blade action. So enough on that. So we're gonna cut that there, and then the next thing that we're gonna do is actually start talking about defenses in this kind of a system.